FDA looks at an entire development program for a new medical product. And as you said, when you're talking about phase 1, 2, and 3, what we're talking about is the clinical research that's involved in that development. That is the research in humans. I would like to say that before that even takes place, FDA has to agree that the earliest human studies can go forward. And there has to be a basis of knowledge, it could be from animal studies, manufacturing, et cetera, to believe that it's reasonably safe to do studies in humans. Once that evidence is there, a sponsor applies to the FDA for what's called an IND, or investigational new drug, and that is essentially permission to start studies in humans. And then we go through that sequence of phase 1, 2, and 3. Phase 1, the first studies in humans, typically looks at, is this safe in the humans? Does it have some of the is this safe in humans? Does it have the expected effects in this very small number of people? And therefore, is it safe to proceed to larger studies? And those phase 1 trials are typically done in healthy individuals and usually in less than 100 or so subjects, rather small studies. FDA looks at the data from those studies, and if that data looks good, can allow what are called phase 2 trials to proceed. These are studies that typically involve hundreds of patients and give more safety data, and also start giving a sense of what we would call dose response. So let's say you were studying a drug for blood pressure. At what dose do you see that response? At what dose is that response optimal? And perhaps at what dose do you begin to see side effects emerging? So that would be typical for a drug. For a vaccine, you're looking usually in phase 2 at the human's immune response, because the way the vaccine works is it stimulates our bodies to produce antibodies and cells that help us fight against an infection. So typically then there will be data about those antibodies and cells being produced in response to the vaccine that will guide us in terms of, again, what's an optimal dose with the most production of those kind of antibody and cell response, but without adverse events that we're concerned about. So that phase 2 study then in those hundreds of patients gives us more safety data and helps select the dose that will be carried forward in the next set of human studies. And that's phase 3. And these are the very large studies, typically for a vaccine, many thousand individuals. And again, in this phase, they're usually controlled trials, randomized controlled trials, where people will be randomized to receive either that vaccine of interest or potentially a placebo or sometimes an unrelated vaccine to serve as a control. And what those phase 3 studies do is then provide evidence of safety in a much larger group of patients, so thousands, so you begin to be able to detect any rare adverse events. And also, the goal is that there be enough of the disease you're trying to prevent occurring in those patients that you can detect a difference in the vaccinated individuals and the control individuals, and show that that vaccine had an effect in reducing cases of infection. And these studies are called pivotal trials. They're the studies that typically form the basis for FDA's decision whether to approve a product or not.